Joining us now for the legislative response to the governor's budget message, Democratic State Senator Robert Menendez of Union City, a member of the Senate Revenue, Finance, and Appropriations Committee, Republican State Senator Leanna Brown of Morris County, Democratic Assemblyman John Watson of Trenton, the former chairman of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and Republican Assemblyman Bob Franks of Union County, the Republican State Chairman. I should point out before we start that the Republicans decided not to have members of their Appropriations Committee participate in this dialogue tonight. But I'm glad you're here. And Senator Brown, let me begin with you. If someone were to say that this is a humane budget containing modest growth, would you agree with that statement?
Michael, first of all, it's very good to be here, having served for many years on the Appropriations Committee. Yes, the governor did.
You have served in the past on the Appropriations Committee.
Yes, sir. The governor pushed a lot of appropriate buttons, but bottom line, the budget is up over $1 billion from what it was this time last year, and there are no tax cuts.
No tax cuts. You wanted to see a tax cut.
Yes, sir.
You wanted the sales tax cut to be included in the governor's proposal.
That's right.
Senator Menendez, why is this budget nearly $1 billion greater than the last one if this is supposedly such a lean budget?
Well, I think it's around $700 million is the exact figure, and $600 million of that goes to property tax relief and direct state aid to municipalities. So if you don't want property tax relief, then you can reduce the budget and say that, in fact, there is virtually no increase in the budget. In fact, that amount that is in the budget for direct municipal aid, for property tax relief, for direct state aid to different institutions produces about $600 million of the $700 million.
Assemblyman Franks, is that how you see it?
I don't, in all candor. The fact of the matter is that I think everyone in the state of New Jersey believes that there is waste and inefficiency built into this nearly $16 billion budget. The most important mission facing the Appropriations Committee is to identify the waste and inefficiencies that Governor Florio agreed the people of the state want to see wrung out of the state budget. I don't think that exercise has taken place yet. I don't think the administration has been aggressive enough in trying to find it. It's going to be the Republicans' responsibility to identify it and get it out of the budget.
Assemblyman Watson, you've dealt with many budgets. Is there more waste to be gotten out that the Republicans will find?
Well, Mike, I think that this budget for the second year is a balanced budget without new taxes, number one. And to tell you the truth, I think that all the other governors across this great nation of ours would like to be in our position here today in regards to balancing the budget without the problems that other states are having, and on top of it, be able to give back property tax relief and to do the kind of things that we're doing with this humane budget. I think the budget is a good budget. I thought the governor made a good delivery here today, and I only hope that our counterparts will, on the other side of the aisle, would take a good look at what we're doing here, and we're doing it well, and work with us.
The centerpiece of this budget is this revaluation of the pension system. We were hearing last week that the state was facing a $700 million shortfall, and all of a sudden, because of what the administration has done or proposes to do with pensions, we're going to finish this year with a surplus, and there is all this extra money to keep the pain from being too bad. Does the administration deserve a certain amount of credit for this kind of creative public finance?
This has been an idea that's been talked about. Michael Horn was on your program last night. He said when he was treasurer during the Kane years, there was a surplus, so he did not have to consider this particular means of reevaluating pensions. But to get back to Senator Menendez's point, we as Republicans are going to change the process. And one of the processes is that you compare apples and apples. And last year, at this time, the budget was $1 billion less. During the year, we add appropriations, and we have got to stop having our Revenue, Finance, and Appropriations Committee simply geared to spending the taxpayers' dollars rather than cutting the budget.
Well, I think that it's interesting if Republicans talk a lot that they're going to change the system. It's interesting on the first night of the opportunity that they could have their two budget chairmen here, that they don't have them, and it would have been interesting for them to now start. They've drawn the line in the sand. They said to the public, elect us, and if you elect us, we'll show you what we're going to do. They now have a budget that they've heard, and still we don't have their budget people here to discuss what it is that their reactions are and where they're headed. For example, if you want to cut the sales tax, having heard the governor's speech about reducing property taxes, to provide educational aid, to hold the transit fares. What is it that you want to cut? I mean, keep hearing cut, and now having had 2 years of the Republicans having had the opportunity to really go over this entire tax program that went through, I think it's about time to tell us where you're going to cut.
Well, let's hear from Bob Franks, and maybe you would also address why the budget chairmen aren't here this evening.
Well, Michael, my friend Senator Menendez may want instant analysis. He may want instant answers. He may want no public input involved in this process. The fact of the matter is that's the way the Democrats did it, and that's what got this state into horrendous fiscal condition. And believe me, when you have to sell roadways from one state agency to another, when you have to accelerate tax collections after, in the previous year, having enacted the largest tax increase in the history of this state, I'm not certain that the model we want to follow is the instant answer model that Senator Menendez would like us to follow. We're going to be deliberative. We're going to be careful. We're going to be prudent. We're going to put a reliance on people's input. We think there's some great ideas out among New Jerseyans who participate in government and those who pay for government. We want to listen to the best of their ideas. We want to have some very thoughtful sessions where we can ask questions of cabinet commissioners, not just state treasurers, but all members of the cabinet. We hope that the Democrats are going to join us in recognizing that the error of their ways of the past 2 years and that we need to open up this process to more public input. This address was delivered 5 hours ago. To expect the Appropriations Committee chairman or anyone else at this juncture who has just seen this for 5 hours to have a thorough and thoughtful deliberative analysis is the kind of government run with a mentality that just hasn't worked for New Jersey. We're here to change.
But Bob, you know that for 2 years, and you've been the policy chairman, you're the Republican state chairman, which is probably why they sent you here tonight versus the budget people.
No, because we're a team effort, Mr. Senator.
The bottom line is that for 2 years you've been criticizing this. 2 years is plenty of time to come up with the differences, and it's not the governor's budget message. You just want a campaign based upon really a total repeal of $2.8 billion. You're only talking about a penny now, and if you can come up with $600 million after 2 years of considerations of having the whole axis, your budget people like Rodney Frelinghuysen have been the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the past, has served I think 8 years. Certainly he's got to have some ideas, and he didn't even need the governor's budget message to talk about those ideas. He made it crystal clear this
afternoon that he was going to be talking as a starting point with the governor's own commission that was chaired by Mr. Van Ness. There are millions and millions of ideas of cuts in that particular document.
That's the audit commission.
I think, and you're absolutely right, Senator. Mr. Frelinghuysen and I have served on the Appropriations Committee for many, many years. And Bob, for you to sit here and say that they only had this budget in their hand for 5 hours. For the last 2 years, we've been asking for an alternative budget. And we asked for the input from
I have
from
it
your
on my
side.
shelf in my office.
Well, no, just a moment. You have an alternative budget on your shelf? Well, why didn't you use it?
We did.
John, the fact of the matter is every time we came out with a budget alternative, Governor Florio said the Republicans were irrelevant.
You didn't have a budget alternative. I don't recall not one
Senator
time,
Dorsey put one
I don't
together.
recall one time where the Republicans on either side of the aisle were responsible enough for the people of the state to give them an alternative when they continued to talk about repeal. And we've asked over and over again for an alternative, and no one has come forth with one.
Let's look forward instead of looking back a little bit. Included in the governor's budget proposal is $425 million more in school aid. Something that Republicans in the legislature were calling for a week ago, 2 weeks ago. We need more money for the middle-income communities that are about to be hit hard. Well, the governor, through this pension gimmick or device or whatever you want to call it, seems to have found extra money for education. Good move? Satisfied?
It's one move that needs examination. We have gotten lots of sheets telling us how much money is coming in, Michael, to our various districts. Many of them have had mistakes in them. I've had to go back to my towns and said, sheet 3 said you were getting X number of dollars, but sheet 5 said that you were getting Y numbers. It is a starting point for dialogue, and yes, we will look very seriously into the governor's proposal today.
How about from your side, this extra money and a comment on this pension revaluation and whether it's brilliant public finance or a gimmick or something that the Republicans have known about for years?
Well, you know, I don't. I recall a earlier statement saying that the Treasurer Horn, in the year that years that the Governor Kane was governor, also knew about this pension fund. The thing is that in '89, '90, when our governor took over a budget that was deficit so bad that over $1.5 billion, why instead of continuing to spend and to come up with the gimmicks that they came up with, $100 million from the unemployment compensation fund, of which we're paying back $38 million this year in the budget, in this budget, for that mistake, that gimmick that was done in the Kane administration. Why didn't they come forth with the initiative as we have come forth with it this year?
Well, one could ask, why didn't the Florio administration come forth with it 2 years ago instead of putting forward $2.8 billion in taxes? But let me ask this: is it a good move at this point in time or not? Is it a great save on the part of the administration?
Well, two quick answers to your question, Michael. One is, Republicans were calling for delay of school elections, more aid because of the districts that were being hurt, and here they have that response by the governor. And yet, you know, I think they have a problem with governing, and they're going to come to a realization real soon that they are going to be governing. And here's a response to that issue: $400 and some odd million that primarily will take care of those districts that are being hurt. So that, I think, is good. Secondly, on the whole pension issue, the bottom line is that I, for one, want to see it. It certainly seems to be a novel idea. I want to test its assumptions, that it's underlying it. And I also want to make sure that present union members and retirees are secure in the process. And if that all works out, then I think it is a good move. If it's been studied by previous administrations, the actuaries support it and will come forth and testify to that fact, and the assumptions are correct, then I think it is a reasonable and constructive way to try to make a budget meet ends.
Michael, we haven't discussed the Medicaid challenge. The governor is hoping that he's going to get more money from Washington. There seem to be a lot of ifs in this budget. If we get the reevaluation of the pension funds, if we get more money from Washington, if we get increased revenues, things will work out. We're going to go out and our oversight capacities, and what is different this year, that the budget's just not going to be done by the Appropriations Committee. I serve on Judiciary. We're going to look at the Attorney General's office, for example, see what savings we can do that, and then in addition, it will be done by the Appropriations Committee.
I want to talk about the QEA for a second, Michael.
But let's stay with that first.
No, I want to say something on the QEA.
I'll let you get back to that point.
A month ago, the Education Department came out with what they indicated districts were entitled to under the QEA. And it would have called for massive tax increases on middle-class communities. We, for the last several weeks, led by Assemblyman Rocco and Senator Ewing, have pointed to the failure of the QEA in terms of providing monies that were essential to avoid major tax increases.
And they heard you. They found the money.
They heard us. They found the money. And they found it by way of revaluating the value of the pension portfolio. And I agree with Senator Menendez. We need to make certain it's actuarially sound. We have to look at how some of these assumptions are going to modify the pension holdings. It is interesting that this morning it was worth $24 billion, and tonight it's worth $29 billion. It may be legitimate, and it's a very interesting way to approach the budget, and it allows us perhaps to dodge the bullet. The bullet has to be recognized, though, in the sense that there's a structural problem in this state budget, that we're relying on $800 million in additional aid from the federal government. We don't have a span of control over that $800 million. It's not immediate. We may get it. I hope we do. But the fact of the matter is,
it really as large as $800 million? I think the magnitude is more like $500 million in Medicaid reimbursements. We're talking about Medicaid reimbursements.
We're talking about disproportionate share of Medicaid reimbursement. The 2-year retroactive provision plus the prospective is over $800 million. Okay. That's a lot of money to be hoping is forthcoming from the federal
What
government.
was your alternative, Bob? What's your alternatives? You've had 2
Bob?
years as the policy arm of the Republican Party and of the legislative aspect of the Republican Assembly to go ahead, and you've criticized all of these things. What's the alternative? What are you for? Are you for cutting homestead
Bob,
rebates?
we
Are you
plan-
for cutting education aid? Are you for cutting the assistance that stabilize transit? Why didn't you finally let us know? I mean, your chairmen weren't here to let us know. So since you're the policy chairman of this new policy group, and you've been working on policy, which I have a great
Bob,
deal of respect
our-
for you, what is the policy?
Our policy is to embark upon a deliberative, dispassionate process of listening to the people of New Jersey,
You've been doing that
of
for 2
listening to the
years.
executive
2
director.
years.
We have not controlled this process in 2 years, and you will see a budget by June the 30th that meets every critical need facing the state of New Jersey, makes investments in a sound future, and also relieves the tax burden on the people of New Jersey, begins to take important steps in each of those directions.
You're going to roll the sales tax back a penny. You're certain of that.
Yes, sir.
Should the governor have acknowledged political reality and included that in his budget
Well,
proposal or not?
Michael, first, let's get a little history here. You and others, as your policy was to take the $2.8 billion that was raised, and you said, along with Bob Franks, I think Senator Dorsey, and the Speaker now, Chuck Hartine, the three of you, said, elect us, and we'll put the $2.8 billion on the table.
No.
Now wait a minute. On top of that, you began to soft pedal it, and now you're at 1 cent. Now, you know, what I can't understand is that you're drawing a line in the sand. You've pulled away from the $2.8 billion, of which you and others had a chance to vote for the sunset, and you didn't, right? And then on top of it, in turn, you're now talking about the 1 cent decrease.
John, all over the state of New Jersey today, people are pulling in their personal budgets, okay? The cost of living has been up about 3.3%. And all of a sudden, we've got a budget that's up 7%. It doesn't
No, your
make
budget is up
sense.
4.7%. 4.7%.
From
But
this
it's fine,
time
but
last
what-
year.
how
What
do we
do
pull
you
it
have
in?
it-
Tell
yeah,
us.
tell us
Tell
what
us
you
how
did.
we
Well,
pull it in.
look, I think it's wonderful.
Well,
that
you've
we
been
are
looking
going
for
to,
2 years
I
now.
think it's wonderful that we're going to put in new police for $3 million. But I get calls into my office that people that were halfway through the training program are not being considered. These people have had taxpayers' dollars invested in them. Maybe we could do that program for 1.5 instead of
Well,
$3
Senator,
million.
you're in the driver's seat now. You're in the driver's seat.
right.
You got veto power. And yet the people of this state now are looking for some answers that you haven't been able to give them over the last couple of years.
We have
so I think the people are
13
looking for
committees,
some, what is
John.
your alternative?
Let me start with one.
You know, and I've been asking for that as the budget chairman last year. I've asked for it for 2 years, for someone to come up and give us an alternative to look at, of which we were open-minded about, and no one has ever came up with an alternative. Now, you're in the driver's seat. You're talking about things that you don't like, and you know. But what is your program? Tell us what your program is.
John, we're looking at a collective program. For example, my newspaper just had a series on the cost of administrators in my county of Morris. I think maybe we have to give a real look and make sure that our education dollar is going to the student and the person who trains the student, for example. I think we have a whole new department of energy and environment, and we have to look and see where the money is being spent there.
In other words, you want more
Step
time
by-
to study this in a deliberative fashion.
Exactly. And get
And you're
input
not going to
from the-
say here tonight where you're going to cut.
You got it.
Let me clarify something here. The governor did not go for the 6 cent sales tax. He did not take the bait, as it were. Is the reason he did not do that because he wants to force the Republicans to show the very cuts we're talking about?
No, I think that the governor made a decision. He said it in his speech. We made certain hard decisions here. We want to reduce property tax relief. We want to maintain the property tax relief program we have. We want to give the education aid that we're giving to all of these districts, not districts like mine that are primarily urban, but suburban, to try to help them out. Some of them are actually going to go
And
up
all
from
this
a
cannot-
negative.
all this cannot be
and
done
all of
if you
this
cut
cannot
the
be
sales
done
tax.
with a $600 million sales
So
tax
maybe
cut.
one of the things that the Republicans will have to do is cut the homestead rebate That's something that we've been hearing
Well, the
about.
governor, of course, cut it a little bit today. I'm glad he's decided that it's no longer good to give to people who live in housing projects. I thought that was a very constructive decision.
Let's stop there. Do you agree with that people in public housing projects should not get homestead rebates?
I think people who are being totally subsidized in many ways, their housing totally subsidized, should not be getting it. Those who are in housing projects that are working, the working poor, should be able to get it. Now, those who are totally waiting, for those housing rentals to be paid, that's a different thing. And then we're speaking of our welfare clients that we have in our state that we have to. That's a part of their grant.
Beyond those people,
yeah.
Do you believe in $500 rebates maximum $500 rebates for those who qualify for them under the present program, or is that another thing that you have to look at over the next few months?
We're committed to retaining the homestead rebate program. There are going to be some adjustments in it. One of the adjustments is going to be the one that was called for by the governor today. There may be others. I think it will be dependent upon how many other areas we can identify and how much money we can cut out of the budget and not impair the delivery of important services.
What do you think of the governor's call? This was a good budget for higher education, one of the best budgets in recent years for higher education. What do you think of the governor's call to create a $30 million incentive program to use on public colleges as incentives for them to keep tuitions to 4.5% or lower?
I've been sort of amused that in both the speech today and in his State of the State, he spent a lot of time on higher ed, forgetting the mess that QEA has made of the whole elementary high school program. So hopefully somehow people are going to get to college.
He is spending $425 million more on those schools as well.
Well, we know, Michael, that there's some argument about accountability about how some of this education money has been
Michael,
spent.
the QEA has a 5-year projection. And I think before it even was put into operation, we were criticized for QEA. They haven't even allowed QEA to even try to be what it's supposed to be. You can criticize things, but one thing for sure, the QEA, if I think you give it the time to have the 5 years implemented, I think you'll see one of the best that has ever happened for education in this state.
John, nothing more clearly defines the differences between the two parties than the statement you just made. If we let the QEA run its course, our kids would be educationally bankrupt and our communities would be financially bankrupt.
Bob, if
the QE would have lived with the QEA figures that came out a month ago from the DOE, were you happy with those figures?
Bob, if we follow the Republican Party platform that you put out,
it would cost
us $20 billion.
QEA.
One at a time. Senator Menendez.
Bob, it's time to face reality. You have majorities in both houses. You told the public you were going to repeal $2.8 billion. You can't come up with an answer for $600 million. And your Republican Party platform, if we were to put it into effect, would cost us several $1 billion more. So, I mean, you have to reconcile your words with your actions. And so far, you have been unable to do that.
Where you pull billions of dollars from our party platform.
What you call for in your party platform to do programmatically
Bob, let me
would
tell you
cost
something.
billions of
The
dollars.
investment today of $400 million by Governor Florio was an attempt to save him and us from the QEA. The numbers from the QEA were out a month ago. They would have devastated middle-class communities. That's why he came up with $400 million in additional assistance today to help those foundation communities.
I think very clearly.
The QEA was been a failure.
Very clear.
Everybody in New Jersey knows it, Bob.
Clearly,
it's time for you guys to
You argue out of one side. It's a failure
system.
because there's not enough money for your communities.
Right.
When the money is put there in your communities, you say the budget's gone up, and then you go ahead and you attack it.
Senator,
you can't have
money
it both ways.
solves
Those
the
days are
problem.
over.
Excuse me. We have 30 seconds left. Senator Brown, is this process going to be as contentious over the next 5 months as it's been here tonight, or are you going to somehow achieve harmony?
It will be spirited, Michael.
As usual, more so, less so?
A little more so.
Assemblyman Watson, what will it be like in the Assembly committees over the next 5 months?
Well,
Real quickly,
I think in the next 5 months, they're in the spotlight now. They're going to have to come up with the alternative. They're going to have to come up with their plan. And on top of that, I'm a little disgusted that my chairman is not sitting here tonight answering some of the questions that you have asked.
All right, John Watson, Bob Menendez, Leanna Brown, Bob Franks, thank you all very much for being with us, and thank you for being with us. You can see more budget reaction on the rebroadcast of New Jersey Network News tonight in about half an hour. Good night.